Welcome back to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to continue on to the second segment, which again revolves around the Dallas Cowboys, Stephen Jones. Everyone knows about all the comments that were made already from Jerry Jones on the Cowboys this season, crucial season, everybody knows that, but everybody just runs with the all-in comments, what that's all about, how up to this point the Cowboys really haven't lived up to that at all in just terms of free agency. In everyone's mind, once they heard that, they felt that they got a little excited. They felt that the Cowboys could make a run at this thing, if you would go as far as saying that, with Jerry Jones saying that they're all in. They expected signings. They expected potentially extensions for some of their biggest players. But up till now, we haven't seen any of that, and people are looking for answers. The fans want answers. What can they expect out of this? I'm sure they're hearing a lot of negative stuff and a lot of things that fans of the Cowboys don't want to hear when it comes to their team and being contenders. You have to re-sign CeeDee. Dak's on his last year. Micah Parsons is down the road even further. You had a lot of departures, so what are you going to do about that? Are they just going to continue to sit still? Well, today, or actually a few days ago now, at the time of streaming this, they signed Royce Freeman to add to that running back room. So that's at least something that they've taken action to add to that running back room. But it is reported that they are still expected to draft a running back at some point in the draft. So there's that. And Stephen Jones actually came out again yesterday on the 105.3 The Fan radio station show, and they asked him about it, any updates on the offseason and how it's going, and he just stated clearly, to back up Jerry Jones, everybody has their own definition of what that means, but I've never not known us to be all in. Points to the team spending on the roster year over year, as he put it, and he said that shows that they've been all in their eyes for the last few years, just because, like he said, that should always be the mentality, basically, is what he's saying. In his estimation, the team's always all in. So for fans to think any different this year, I don't know. It's a bit different. The way he said it, being all in, it's a bit confusing, honestly, trying to see what that means. They're all in every year, but yeah, they've made other signings in the past, but this year it's just different because they have so many contract situations to work out. They've lost more people this offseason than they have in the past. Jerry Jones saying that they're all in now fit because of all those different aspects of this offseason that we haven't seen in the past. So for Stephen Jones now to say that they've always been all in, he can believe that, but the actions show differently because they haven't reacted or responded in the way that everybody feels that all in really means. You can only really spin that a certain amount of times before you end up landing in the same spot. I don't know how many other ways all in can mean to certain people, but Stephen Jones says that they're always all in. They're always spending year after year on their roster, so not to say that he's content, but that's his sort of pushback on everyone coming back and calling them out on the all-in comments and moving and saying more on that. He says that he and everybody in the organization supports being all in. Everybody thinks they're already all in, but he did acknowledge that this offseason that they have lost a lot of people and they haven't spent as much as they have in the past, but that is in an effort to try and re-sign those big players that they have on their team. Dak, CeeDee, Micah, all have factored into them not spending as much money as they have usually at this point in the offseason in the past. Those three are big components of that, and he broke it down in this way. He said, we spend max money year in and year out. All 32 can only spend the same amount of money over a 5-year stretch. When we're all said and done, we max out over the years our salary cap each and every year. We will have done that. What comes with having a good roster, which we do, we're also looking towards signing our guys. It doesn't mean it happens overnight, but when you're wanting to sign players like Dak and Micah and CeeDee, then certainly you have to hold money back if you want to have a realistic chance of signing those guys. It is a bit more specific than we've heard Stephen Jones say before, admitting that it's not a bad thing. He didn't point it out in a bad thing. He didn't say it like it's a burden. I'm sure he didn't want it to come out that way, but some people I'm sure will think of it that way as an excuse right now for them to not be as active in free agency. But then again, they decided, just like they decided in the past, to spend all this money on other free agents, on trying to get better. That was their decision, when they also could have saved money before in the past if they decided to do so. Save money earlier on instead of waiting almost till the last minute with these deals. They could have decided to extend CeeDee last year, extend Dak maybe a year or two ago when he was eligible, and that would have created more wiggle room in the salary cap space that they have. But now, since they're waiting till the last minute and their team has lost more people, of course they can't predict that, but it's the reality. They've lost more people now. Now they're sort of scrambling to try and gather all this money last minute to try and re-sign their best named players, when they could have been prepared for all of this before if they were proactive with it and extended at least CeeDee Lamb last year before he had a massive year, and now he's going to want more money. So that gamble of waiting till now to try and do it has not panned out for the Cowboys, because CeeDee balled out. They still didn't get any better, and they lost a bunch of players. So what all could have gone bad, or sort of has gone bad for the Cowboys, but it's not all terrible. I don't want to paint it in that way just because they still have the option to do that. I'm sure they see options where they can keep all three of them, but then at that point, when I'm sure they want to keep all three, at that point I'm sure you have to ask the question, with all this spending and trying to re-sign both of them, it becomes a case of having quantity over quality in a football team on a roster. Having three players that are at the top of their position group taking up all the money, and then everybody else on the roster, all the other positions, are average or below average just because they're on low salaries, because all the money went right up to the top to those three players. Do you use that? Do you go that way? Or do you have to, unfortunately, sacrifice one of them and keep as many as you can, one or two of them, get more money, and then be a little bit more balanced, not have such a disparity with the top paid, top talented guys on your roster, and then everybody else is just way below? You try and bring it as even as possible. I think that's probably what I would do. Of course, the Cowboys, the fans, nobody would want to lose any of these three players, but honestly, reality speaking, trying to be as logical as I can with this, I think it would just be in their best interest to have to pull that Band-Aid off and have to realize that it might have to just come to losing one of them to build a competitive roster. In all honesty, and just in my mind, I don't see them being any better than they have been with all three of them staying, but the rest of their team is a little bit below average, not as good as it has been, specifically that offensive line, because that is a huge part of any team, not just the Cowboys' success. But in free agency, they lost their starting center, Tyler Biadasz, their starting left tackle, Tyron Smith, and they have to try and fill those holes. But where did they get the money? All right, free agency might not be an option because of the money, so you look at the draft. They sit at 24 right now. Who really can be drafted there that can be a day one starter? If you hit on one, that's great, but you still have another hole to fill out there. And where do you go from there? Well, Stephen Jones also talked about that, and he really said as an answer, neither of those options. He said that he doesn't see all the urgency from the Cowboys fans, doesn't really agree with the urgency in trying to, use a first round pick and trying to replace a offensive lineman through that way. He doesn't see it like that. He emphasized the trust in the younger players that they have on their roster. Younger players like Matt Waletzko, a fifth round pick 2 years ago. He only played 4 games in the 2 seasons, but he is one of their younger offensive linemen. Stephen Jones also mentioned Asim Richards, a fifth round pick just last year. Again, played mostly special teams, hasn't really had any game minutes, any game reps at all so far. And then you have others like Brock Hoffman, TJ Bass, who are names that Stephen Jones brought up. But all of these players, again, does he really have a lot of trust, this much trust, to throw them in there and expect similar results? That's unrealistic if he just wants to throw them out there and hope for the best. Their offensive line wouldn't be awful, but it would definitely be a big drop-off from what they've seen in the past, and then how that affects Dak, his protection, how it makes everybody else look, because if Dak's playing bad, constantly getting hit, it's not going to make CeeDee look good. They have no running back already, and other than CeeDee, they don't have that much. Jake Ferguson looked great, but again, you need a very good offensive line, which they had last year. Just across the board, all 5 positions looked solid, and Jake Ferguson had a big year. CeeDee obviously had a big year. Dak played great. So I think on top of the free agents, the offensive line has to be a crucial piece to this whole thing, or else nothing's really going to happen. I think it'll all just fall apart at that point. And now you get to a point where in this offseason, you want to re-sign everybody. That's what Stephen Jones says. But it seems like CeeDee could be the first one, at least up in those negotiation process, at least just because he hasn't shown up so far to the spring workouts. The first day was on Monday. We're now on Wednesday, and he's not there. So he hasn't shown up. Are you going to call it a holdout right now, not being there for this part? Probably not officially, but he seems to be trying to apply a bit of pressure there by not showing up at this point. We have to see how it develops going forward, if this actually turns out into an official holdout. But I think it's genius. It's a smart move by CeeDee Lamb, because he obviously sees that they have low money in their salary cap. They have to try and re-sign one of them. I'm sure they'd love to, and by doing this, he's applying a little bit of pressure there. They have more time with Micah, so he's not really in contention for that. It's just really between CeeDee and Dak to try and re-sign right now. It could just come down to really, do they pick CeeDee or do they pick Dak? I'm sure CeeDee wants to stay around the Cowboys, so he's applying this pressure, this method to try and get an extension done with him sooner rather than later. And we're going to see how it all ends out. That's where it all stands right now. No real movements as of yet, but Stephen Jones has provided at least a reason that most people have come to the conclusion of already, that they are trying to save up for all these big-name players, but is it going to be a case of too little, too late for at least one of them? Is it smart to get rid of one of them to try and build up the rest of your roster? Crucial decisions are coming for the Cowboys down the line. Starting next week with the NFL Draft, it'll paint a clearer picture of where they're going. But in the meantime, we're going to move on with the rest of the show. 2 more stories coming up on today's episode. We're going to talk about the Packers and what they're going to do in the first 3 rounds with 5 picks that they've accumulated over these last few years with trades and stuff like that. We're going to see what their avenues are in that aspect, and then we're going to continue on with Deion Sanders and talking about more around his comments on an interview with Front Office Sports that he gave last week. We're going to diagnose that, dive deeper into that. More of that coming up after this break. Again, you're watching the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.